And now we'll be taking a look at snapping in Blender. Snapping can be really helpful in a lot of different situations, and snapping can be accessed with this third button on our header. And now this works a little different than these two other options because it has a toggle that can be toggled on and off. So you can left click to toggle snapping on and turn it off. You can also use a keyboard shortcut Shift Tab to toggle it on and Shift Tab again to toggle it off. Or you can also hold down Control key while you're moving your object, scaling or rotating to temporarily sort of turn on snapping. So if I go ahead and select this object and grab it along the y-axis, you can see I'm able to freely move it, so snapping is not turned on. Let's go ahead and toggle snapping and then click on the options for snapping. And first we have snap width. We're going to come back to this in a second. Next we have snap to. By default we have increments selected. What it means is that it's going to snap in increments. So if I move my object slightly, something like here, and then turn on snapping, now each time I move my object, it's going to snap in increments to relative to its previous position. So the next snap is going to be somewhere here, and then the next one is going to be there. So let's press G to grab along y-axis, and as I start moving, you can see that it's moving in increments. If we want to snap it exactly to this grid, then we can open our options and enable this absolute grid snapping option. And then if we press G, and you can see immediately it sort of snaps to the grid, and then it's just going to snap to the grid. The next type of snapping that we have is vertex snapping. So it's going to use our object vertex points for snapping. Let's go ahead and create a copy of this object by pressing Shift D and move it there. So now what's going to happen is that if we open our options, it's going to snap between vertex points, and now the snap with function is going to work. So it's going to find the closest vertex point. Now we're moving this object and trying to snap it to this object. So if I press G to grab, then the closest vertex of this object is going to snap to the vertex point where I hover my cursor. This is going to make more sense if I press G to grab and move my cursor, and you can see how it snaps there. I'll go ahead and press Ctrl Z. So what's happening is that it's finding the closest vertex points. In this case, it's going to be this vertex point, and it snaps it there. So if we go ahead and move this object slightly to the side, now this vertex point is going to be the closest to that vertex point. So if I press G to grab and move my cursor, you can see how that snaps there. And if we move this object up a little bit, so now in this case, this vertex point should be the closest. Let's go ahead and drag that over there, and you can see how it snaps there. The next option that we have is center, and this is going to use the origin point of our object and snap it there to that vertex point. So if we press G to grab and move, you can see how it snaps it there. I'll press Ctrl Z to just show it to you again. Let's go ahead and snap it there. And then the next two options that we have snap with is median and active. This is for when you're snapping multiple objects. So if I create a copy of this object and select both of these, and let's set to median point. So now it's going to find the median point of these two objects, which should be somewhere around here, and it's going to snap it there to that vertex point. So let's press G to grab and move there, and you can see how it snaps it there. And finally, we have active. This is going to use our active element. So it's going to snap origin of this object to that vertex point there. So let's go ahead and move it, and just like that. And if I move my last active selection there, then snap, you can see how it snaps it there. So that's how these snap with options work. So let's go ahead and set it to center so that the origin point of our object snaps there. Let's go through some of these other options. So the next snapping type is edge. This is going to snap our object to the edges on the next object. So let's press G to grab and move it there. And you can see how it snaps the center or origin of our object to that edge over there. Let's just scale it so we can see it a little bit better. Let's move it there, and you can see how it snaps there. Next we have face. Let's select the face mode, and let's go ahead and select this big cube. So now it's going to move or snap this face to the top of this area because that's going to be the closest sort of face. Actually, we set it to center. If we set closest, then that's going to be the behavior. So let's press G to grab, something like there. And if we set center, then it's going to snap the origin point of that object to the top face, like that. Now, when using any of these snapping modes, now starting with Blender version 4.0, we have a new option. So, for example, if I go to vertex point snapping, and if I press G to grab, I can press B, and that's going to let me pick up my snapping. It's called snapping base, so you can pick up whichever edge you want to snap there. So if I select that edge point there, then I can snap my object, and you can see it snaps there. And one more thing that's new with Blender version 4.0 is that if you press G to grab, so as you can see that I'm between this sort of movement action, and if I want to rotate my view, now this wasn't possible prior to Blender version 4.0, but starting with Blender version 4.0, you can hold on Alt and that middle mouse button and you can orbit or change your camera angle. And then you can sort of continue that movement. Now this is helpful in cases where, for example, if I press G to grab and then I press B button to pick up the snapping point, and let's say that I want to pick the snapping point on the other side of this object. Now before the Blender 4.0, we would cancel out of this action and then redo it by rotating our camera. But now we can just hold on Alt and middle mouse button, rotate the view, pick up this point, and then we can sort of snap it wherever we want. So that's going to make it like really easy and convenient. The next type of snapping that we have is volume. It's going to sort of find volume of your object and place your objects there. So it's helpful for placing one object between or sort of inside another object. And then we have edge center. So this is going to snap object to edge center. So if we make it a bit smaller like that, press G to grab and move, you can see that it's going to place it exactly in the center of this object's edge, like that. And then we have edge perpendicular. Now what this going to do is that it's going to snap in perpendicular directions. So in this case, it's going to be like these 4 directions. So if I press G to grab, you can see how it snaps there. But if I move it diagonally, then it's not going to like snap in this area because it's only going to snap in perpendicular direction. And then finally, we have face project and face nearest. These are a little bit advanced because these are more helpful when we're editing parts of our objects and we have multiple elements. So it's like good for when you have really complex shapes that you want to sort of wrap around objects in those kinds of situations. It would be helpful. Just to quickly sort of demonstrate it a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and create this UV sphere and tap into edit mode. Now you don't have to follow this along. This is just to demonstrate this function. So I'll go ahead and set this to face nearest, and for now I'm going to turn off snapping. So now if I start extending this object towards the top z-axis, you can see that it's not snapping, and I have to like manually scale it down and then again repeat the same process. So you can see that it becomes really annoying. So in that sort of situations, I can turn on face nearest, and now what's going to happen is that as soon as I start extending this object and press Z, you can see it's going to sort of automatically snap there to my object. So I can just keep extending very easily and quickly. It's going to automatically snap all the individual vertex points, all of these vertex points to the nearest point on the other object. And finally, we have this align rotation to target and backface culling options. So let's go with those. So what happens is that if we have like this sphere is going to be a really good example, and let's go ahead and add a few cone objects and move it up like that. I have to turn off snapping and then move it up like that, and let's just scale it down slightly. Now if we select our face selection mode here and then we start snapping this, you can see that even though it sort of snaps to that object, but it's not rotating or aligning to that spherical shape. So in that case, we can turn on align rotation to target, and now if we press G to grab, you can see it aligns it to that object underneath. And then finally, we have backface culling. So what happens is that in 3D objects, we only have one side of our objects. So if I select this cube, and then if I go ahead and delete this face, so this inside of the object is this is an empty sort of object. Now by default, Blender has an option to display this, but I'm going to turn it off. So this is what our object now looks like. So now what's going to happen is that if I try to snap this object there, you can see that it snaps there, right? But actually, let me just quickly move that up like that. Now if I try to snap this object from underneath this area, since this is the top side of the face which is visible, but then from the inside this has no data, so it's not visible. So if I try snapping it from the bottom side, you can see that it's not going to work. But if I want to make sure that it works, then I can enable this option. So let's turn that back off, and now it should snap down here. Actually, we have to turn it off. So you can see that it snaps there, but if you turn this backface culling, then it's not going to snap down there from the underneath. So this is sort of a thing that you would like in very rare circumstances you would use this. Finally, we have exclude non-selectables. In Blender, using our outliner, we can make so that some objects are not selectable, and so you can sort of exclude that from snapping so that it doesn't snap to those objects. And to demonstrate that, we're going to go ahead and click on this filter icon and then click on this icon. And now we can select the sphere and enable this icon here. So now what's going to happen is that we can no longer select this object. So now if we move our object, you can see it still snaps there. So if we go ahead and enable this option, now it's not going to snap there anymore. So we're sort of excluding non-selectable objects. Finally, it's affecting our movement. So as we're moving our object, the snapping is affecting our movement. But if you want to also make it affect your rotation and scale, then you can enable those. So by default, you can see if I rotate, it's not affecting it, but movement is affected by the snapping. So we can go ahead and turn on snapping for rotation and scale. Now if I rotate, you can see how it snaps there. So if I rotate along z-axis, and same thing with scaling. Just a quick rundown. Snap with allows you to select the part of the object that you want to snap to the other object. Then snap to is going to be which element of the next object that you're trying to snap to is going to use for snapping. Snap individual elements is a bit advanced topic for now, but it lets you snap multiple parts of your object to other objects. And then we've already seen how some of these options work here. And then finally, effect is going to let you change whether you want to snapping to affect movement, rotation, or scale. So, or you can enable all three of these. You can also enable multi-snapping. So if you hold on Shift and click on these, it's going to enable multiple of these snapping methods, and you can use them if you want to.